Blessed is the lion whom the man devours, for that lion will become man. But cursed is the man whom the lion devours, for that lion will become man. That's from the Gospel of Thomas, Logion 7. And actually, I'm taking it from the book, The Seeing with the Eye of the Heart by Cynthia Bourgeault. I actually was fortunate enough to spend time with Cynthia a little bit at a 5-day silent retreat. And she's a tiny little thing. She's a tiny little creature, but she is powerful. She rocked my world, I'll tell you. It was a very pivotal moment in my life, actually, attending that retreat. So what does it mean, blessed is the lion that the man devours? Well, I think the lion symbolizes our animal nature, our base needs and desires, right? Like the things that are kind of primal, animalistic. And why is the lion blessed to be devoured by the man? Well, I like to think about it even in like sort of a gross way, like the fact of what it means to devour. I think this is an interesting detail too to this whole conversation. He doesn't say, blessed is the lion that the man shuns away or denies, or he says devour, as in almost like integrate, to digest into oneself. I think that's what the word Cynthia used, was to digest, to take into yourself, to integrate. So we're not talking about shunning our animal nature. It's about using it for a higher purpose. You know, one of the things that stands out about being a human being is our consciousness, right? Our intellect. And when we learn and understand our animal nature, we can use it to a higher degree, for a higher purpose, maybe is even a better way to put it. And this makes it, why not just transcend it, as it's often talked about? And actually, transcending in its deepest intention and meaning, I think, does mean to integrate. But often when we use the word transcend, it's almost like to escape from, to shun, as I say, right? But this is not nearly as useful as actually appreciating it, integrating it, becoming very familiar with it. Because then we can take this animal nature and have it serve a higher purpose. Because how do we understand deeper without understanding all, if that makes any sense? And we're going to get into this a little bit more in a minute. Now, cursed is the man that the lion devours. When the animal nature takes us over, when we become subject to these base desires. Cursed is the man. Why? Because now this lion is able to use some of these higher faculties that a human being has, intellect and abilities to manifest like no other creature, right? But when they serve the base needs, the animal nature, it can be very dangerous. I think it's not hard to see where this takes us because we're actually living it out in this day. This is part of why I really wanted to have this conversation. This is where we end up, right? I mean, when you think about the amount of energy and time and resources that are spent on consumption. Now, this is not a judgment. There's nothing wrong with consuming. We must consume, right? There's a certain amount of things that we need, and there's even more things that we need than food and shelter and clothing, right? I mean, there's things that can stimulate higher reasonings. But if we really pay close attention, 90% of that consumption is really just sensory gratification, to put it the simplest way, right? Sensory gratification or distraction, distracting us from the things that we don't want to look at, from the things we don't want to think about. This is what the vast majority of consumption is for. Now, what happens when we consume in this way? It becomes very, very much like an addict. In a certain way, you're chasing after something that you will never get. Consuming will never bring us peace, will never bring us meaning. It'll never get us in touch with the depth of life. Actually, the only way it'll ever do that is when we reach the end of the cycle of it, when we realize this is not doing it, you know? And I think, again, we're playing this out in our modern day here, where we're able to do so much, to buy so much, to see so much, to learn so much. But for what end? Is it for the higher faculties of man or for the lower base desires of an animal? Again, too, I hope I made this really clear. This isn't about judging the animal nature, because we aren't trying to do that. It isn't something that we want to avoid or deny. It's something that we want to integrate, understand deeply, and then use that understanding for a greater purpose. I just did a talk or a video about appreciating beauty. A human being is a very special and sacred thing, being in a human body. I mean, we are very lucky. There's a Buddhist concept that it's the perfect body, that it's the perfect place to be, and you're very fortunate to be there. We're going to get into this too. And that's because only through us, in a certain way, is there the ability, in their terms, to find enlightenment, to find full fulfillment. What does that mean? Well, when we think about these two natures, right, we're talking about animal nature and human or higher human nature, right? We're talking about the form versus spiritual, if you will, right? The material world versus the spiritual world, something that's beyond the basic physical form. And a beautiful symbol for this, actually, that it returns back to the Christian tradition that I absolutely love, is the symbol of the cross. Now, it can mean many, many things, but one of my favorite ways to interpret it and to use that symbol as a way of meditation, if you will, is that the cross consists of two lines, right? There's a horizontal line and a vertical line. And the horizontal line stands for the material world. And the vertical line stands for the spiritual. And the poignant part about that symbol is the place where those two things meet. And that is the destiny of a human being. It is within us, and I'm going to get even more specific than that, not only within us, but within the human heart. That is the exact point where the spiritual world and the material world meet. In your heart, in my heart, but only when we take the time to appreciate it. Only when we take the time to realize, to open ourselves to the fact that this is happening, that we are like the vessel in which these two, what almost seem like opposing things or very different things mix, if you will. They meet within us. But just like beauty, only when we appreciate, only when we take the time to pull our awareness into it. Again, awareness is one of those things that makes us human. And this is why getting in touch with our animal nature, when we really understand it, when we integrate it, when we look deeply into it, not when it's running us, right? But when, and it's not about control, it's about deep understanding. Wisdom comes from effortless action. That's when we know when knowledge has reached the pinnacle of wisdom, if you will, when it's transitioned over into a different sort of knowing. It's when we just act. I often say that when, you don't touch a hot stove because you know it's hot. It's a sort of a hot stove clarity, right? Well, that's what wisdom is. And when we see our animal nature so clearly, it doesn't pull us around like that anymore. I mean, why would you touch a hot stove? It's hot. Why would you look for pleasure in something, or not even pleasure, because you will find pleasure in these material things, right? But you're not going to find purpose. Why would you look for purpose and meaning in these sense gratifications? It's not going to be found there. So understanding our animal nature is, at least in part, understanding what I just said and realizing that we have a destiny as a human being. And our destiny is to mix these two worlds, is to bring them into harmony and unity, the material and the spiritual. And one of the best ways to do that is to open yourself to the movements of the heart. Some of these movements are wonderful, right? Appreciating beauty is always a nice experience, or almost always. I mean, I would say 99% of the time, right? Feeling vulnerable is not always pleasant, but it's always useful if we willingly engage in the act of vulnerability. It can open us in ways that brings deep purpose into our life. You know, sometimes after a really challenging thing for myself, like this just happened not that long ago, where I had to really look at something about myself, and it wasn't fun and it wasn't easy, right? And it left me feeling very raw and vulnerable. But if I paid close attention, I felt very alive, very in touch, very connected. At an ineffable level too, right? Like it was like everything, it's like the colors were brighter sort of experience, right? The conversations I were having were more engaged. When I even my thoughts were clearer, tenderer. This is the act of that, that was part of what it was too. It was an ego check, right? So it was like some of the manifestations that had happened through my physical life, some of the things that had come about from my behaving a certain way in the land of form, met with my spiritual self. And there was a bit of a showdown, if you will, right? And what was left was a beautiful experience of wholeness. I didn't deny the ego side of myself. I just saw it very clearly. Transcending our animal nature is a very powerful way to spend your time. Some of that can be denying yourself sometimes, and that's more not to deny as into spiritually bypass something, right? Like because you don't want to feel it, but to maybe withhold yourself. Like when I spent 5 days in silence with Cynthia Bourgeault and a group of people, it wasn't just her and I, obviously. That was a very unique experience, and there was a great deal of benefit from restraining from talking. Silence is a beautiful thing, but actually refraining from that, right? So I'm withdrawing or withholding that desire, because I'm a talker too. So it's a challenging thing to some degree. But there was a great rewards that came with that, right? Holding back from eating that thing when you know you don't need to eat it. As silly as it is, if you do it mindfully and you do it for the purpose of watching your animal nature and how it behaves, that can be a very purifying act. It can be something that can actually take you to the next level, if you will. The more consciously we engage with that sort of thing, it's not repressing. I can't stress that enough. It's being mindful and watchful. That's why it doesn't happen just by denying yourself. It happens by watching that animal nature and how does it respond and what's really going on, and not judging it, just looking at it, opening yourself to it, seeing if you can understand it deeper and not just follow the impulse, right? I highly encourage you to check out and devour your animal nature. It's something that would benefit you, your family, and our society. As always, I thank you for your time. It's precious.